Thank you very much. So good morning, everybody. This morning, I'd like to give you a little bit of our experience in EDF dealing with climate issue, meteorological issues, how we have handled that over years. So for sure, we're belonging to a big utility. So let me, how it works, I can do it, yeah. You have probably heard this week different talks from people from my company. So just to remind you that we are a big operator in the electricity business, in the energy markets as a whole. We are doing also gas business now. We have a balance between regulated and deregulated activities in different countries. And we are a leader in French and UK electricity markets. We have positions in Italy as well, but also in Asia and United States. So EDF was formerly the monopoly in France and started after the World War, the Second World War in the 50s to become one company in France, but now we have expanded worldwide. And we are an actor which is low carbon in specific emissions because we have a lot of renewables, hydro and nuclear power plants in our mix. And so, as you see on these numbers, we are a big player in terms of carbon because we have something like 80 million tons of CO2 as a whole. But in terms of specific emissions, our generation capacity is strong. And so we have something which is one of the lowest of the big utilities in the world. So we have a business which is quite linked with meteorology. And if I look back to the way the company was shaped in the 50s, our first mix was hydro. And we have a fleet of dams in France that was the main generation at this time. And so the company started to be acquainted with meteorological data very soon in its business. And the link with the French Weather Service and with people dealing with meteorology has been very strong. And the culture of the company has continued on this side. And you will see with the story I'm going to tell you that it's still the case today, and we have kept this capacity to deal with the climate and meteorological issues, and which is becoming more and more important. Certainly on the hedging side, we are hedging a lot in our company because we have to hedge many risks for the commodities, for the carbon now, for the weather. But you will see that what we have done on data, on meteorological information and climate information is quite important in the sense that we are trying to understand what are the better data we can use for our business. So just this morning, I'd like just to give you an overview of why meteorology and climate are important for us. Second, to give you a storyline, how meteorology and climate have been dealt with, and what are the new challenges now, climate change adaptation, and what are the lessons we can take up for others, what we can take up for us, but also is our experience important or useful for others that want to deal with these issues. So the first thing, so there are a lot of key factors which have to be taken into consideration in our business. The supply demand is very sensitive to climate hazards, but it has been said probably in many talks this week. So on the demand side, temperature, heating, cloudiness, on the hydro, the snow and rain regimes. For the networks, when you are dealing with networks, storms or freezing conditions are quite important. And all the decision cycles are concerned. So from very short timescales to long-term timescales. And so we are building on various representations of hazards and certainties. So we have to deal with probability density functions built on historical series, detailed examination of extreme values, and you have probably talked this week on this issue. We are quite concerned for especially looking at the extremes into the future. and how we can use precautionary principles for our future investments, and I will talk a little bit later on this. So many challenges on the demand side, on the supply sides. Our activities strongly depend on climate and meteorology. And so we have, over the years, and since the beginning the company was shaped, we had to build different strategies for dealing with different issues along our life. So the facts, if I'm taking only the company in France, we have a mix which is basically based on nuclear and hydro, so 80% nuclear basically, with 19 nuclear power plants, with 58 reactors, different cooling systems which are dealt with, and you will see it is important for the managing, especially the climate change issue adaptation. And we have some coal power plants, some gas, very few coal power plants now, only 2 in France, and we have gas power plants just for peak loading on this important mix. But there are also the more and more renewables coming into the mix, with the subsidies which are used for putting renewables in Europe. So this causes some questions about intermittency that we have to deal with as well. So just one number to remember, but maybe you have heard this before, in terms of consumption during the winter, -1 degrees means that we have 2,300 megawatts at stake. So this is quite important. This is two units of nuclear power plants. So this is something quite important to take into account in our business. And also the issue of sensitivity of the electricity system to peak periods. And so this is something that when you have to manage a mix which is composed like the one we have in France, and we are responsibility of the for the network system to the balance, the end balancing with generation. So you have really to take into account, at best, meteorological data. So what about how the story has evolved over years, and what have been the big breakthrough in our activity on site? So I will not detail this slide. I will give it if you are interested. That gives all the big events we had in the past dealing with on one side climate and meteorological implications, but also all what is going on with the climate change issue, mitigation, adaptation. I will summarize by these storylines. From 80 to 90, essentially, we had a classical activity dealing with meteorological data, but 2 topics emerged clearly during these years. We had to undertake complex statistical studies for studying relationship between meteorological data and supply-demand issues in order to do better forecasts for balancing issues. So we started to have collaboration with the French Weather Service to undertake these statistical studies, and that gave birth to operational systems for forecasting the demand from one day to the other. Another thing that happened is that we have been involved strongly in these years to mesoscale modeling studies for dispersion of effluents in complex terrains. That was an issue very important for our nuclear fleet, especially for emergency procedures. And so we went very far in the system in collaboration with the French Weather Service to build capacity to be able to predict dispersion of effluents in very complex conditions. In the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, there's been maybe a breakthrough years, because the Scientific Advisory Board of EDF, which is a board composed of people outside of the company, recommended EDF to pay attention to the climate change issue. And we're in 90, if you remember, was a year with the first IPCC report, and no one in the industry at this time was looking at this issue. But our director at the research and development in EDF decided that we should be involved on this. And we start with a small group to look at what should be the kind of studies we should envision for EDF in the future. And we started to develop collaboration with French labs, with EU labs, and international labs. And this has been something very important because we have been able during many years to develop some capacity to understand the questions, to try to bring some answers, and to be in a position when the real stuff came to react in the proper way. And in 1999, we started to live a series of big meteorological events impacting strongly our group: storms, heat wave, flooding. And so this has been, all the capacity we have created over years have been quite important and useful in order to build appropriate strategies for coping with the future. So I will not have to detail all the events we have there. I have a couple of slides on this, but one thing interesting is that the kind of question we started in the 80s to look at with the people responsible of the balancing was the kind of question of this one. We have a lot of very cold waves in France sometimes, and in the statistics we use in order to manage and to optimize our fleet every year, we use a very long series of temperature. And in this series of temperature, there is an event which is the winter in '63, which was a very strong winter and which is influencing the optimization very much. So we pay a lot, if you want, to take into account this winter. And the question we had at this time, should we remove this winter of the series in order to have a better optimization, and at least that which would cost a little bit less? And this is the kind of study we start at the beginning in the 80s, and the response to the operational people was, no, you cannot do that. We have looked with some statistical studies, and it's not possible to remove this winter. It could happen again. And so these were the first climate studies we did at EDF. So what are the new challenges now? The new challenges deal with the climate change adaptation. You've seen that climate change now is a very important issue. It is recognized by IPCC now since many years, and the next report will enhance probably strongly this issue. And more clearly, we have seen over years climate change happening. And so the fact that we have been able to build some capacity to understand the question, and the fact that we have started to live climate change, even if all the events we have lived in the past years cannot be attributed for sure to climate change, we see climate change in our business. So I will skip maybe all these slides that show the kind of events we have lived in the past years. In 1999 and 2002 big storms that have affected the business strongly, especially in the southwest of France, where people during 3 weeks have been without electricity. And we had some practical consequences and some practical response to that in terms of networks, in terms of protection of networks for the future. We had a big heat wave in 2003, really strong event that affected also the company in terms of cost. This cost for the company something like 300 million euros, so this is a lot. And so we have been analyzing strongly the event in order to have a good response in the future to similar events. And so, you know, one of the basic questions when you have a heat wave is the capacity to cool the power plants, and especially to comply with the regulation. It's more a question of operationality of the power plants than safety. In fact, we have to comply with the regulations of water release heat water release in the river, and we have to comply with temperature thresholds. And if the threshold cannot be respected, then you have to shut down the power plant. And so when you have this situation during a summer where the temperature of the river can be more important than the threshold, you have to be careful and try to plan differently the management of your power plants. So we learned a lot, and especially one lesson we learned is that we had some power plants near the sea, so less vulnerable to this kind of problem, that were closed for revision during the summer. And one decision we had to take after is that we never now, during the summer, close a power plant which is near the sea, which is probably really less vulnerable to this kind of problem. So now we had, with all these events, to build a strategy for coping with climatic hazards. So we have this first reaction to have after the storms, then we have this flooding in summer 2002, then we have just after the heat wave in 2003. And so we had to put all these events together. These are climate events, and you can't treat that separately. And so we decided to have a climate hazard strategy to create a permanent group in order to be able to respond to crises appropriately. And so this organization has been proved to be very useful because we continued to have very strong events, especially a cold spell in spring 2005. And this crisis management has been able to be a good response to this kind of event in terms of operationality. So now this process is embedded just to enhance the fact that there are things which are quite important, is to be prepared to this kind of event, to anticipate, to communicate properly, and to have a proper crisis management preparedness in order to be effective. And then the basic problems you have to solve when you have this kind of event is to ensure safety to the people and to the goods, and to guarantee security of supply, which is our main business, so to keep a good balance between supply and demand in space and time, every time. So now all this culture has been highlighted in 2010 in a group strategy for adaptation to climate change, which are all basic principles that we ask now all entities to adopt and to create their action plan related to climate change, which is now a reality and more part of the world, and especially we live in France, something which is really clear on this side. So the first pillar of this strategy is to adapt existing facilities that will stay in the landscape for many years, still many years. We have power plants that will be there for a couple of years. They are existing, and we have to adapt them, especially to adapt the cooling systems in order that we can run during summers if we have another heat wave. And this program has been decided, for instance, in France, and there's been an action plan. And the cost of such an action plan, something like 500 million euros over 10 years in order to adapt the fleet. So when you compare the costs we had in 2003 and the losses and the cost of investment you have to do on the margin in order to adapt, you see that these numbers are quite comparable, and that this is really important to do it. We have also to look at our future assets. If we are building a new power plant today, that will probably be in the landscape for at least for 50 years, if it is a nuclear power plant or a fossil power plant or a dam, it will be there for long. So you have to take into account the fact that the climate will not be stable. The climate will change we have some expectations, we know some expectations, and we have really to look at the thing that will be important, especially what will be the extremes we will have to live in such a new climate. And so we pay attention to this issue. You had probably a lecture yesterday on some of the work we are doing on this side. And this is quite important now when we decide to make a new asset, is to take into account climate change really in the design phase. Then we have to boost the resilience of extreme climate events. This is the direct application of our climate hazard plan that was designed previously, and to be prepared every time to crisis management. And for doing this, a lesson we learned is that we have to activate the right research and development in order to address the good topics, the right topics for us. So to keep at least a team of persons that can make the link with the scientific community and the real business we have to do. And at least the experience we had for many years in this business has shown that it was very useful to keep a research and development facility on these questions in order to address the right topics in our business. So I'd like just to talk very shortly about two concepts that emerge in our thinking, which is the concept of resistance and the concept of resilience. When we have all these big events, the first reaction is to try, what should I do in order to resist to the next crisis? And should I build things more solid or with different norms, different standards, and to what point I will go? So this is important in some cases to have some resistance concept. But what we have learned is that what is more important is to be able to have a resilient system, and to build a resilient system means that we have also to develop collaboration with others, and especially the public authorities. When you are in the business to supply electricity, and that you have to provide electricity for everybody, you have to find a way, even in a very big crisis, to be able to recover the system as fast as possible. And this is something that we have learned over years. So basically, you have three pillars and timescales to consider. So preparing the resilience when happens a crisis, it's what I've described before. Preparing the resistance and the resilience of our assets for now and tomorrow, so the new assets, but also the existing assets. And on the long term, you have to develop knowledge and especially pay attention to the research and development which is done outside of the company, and make the right link with the scientists in order to get the better information for addressing our business. So some concrete examples that are now on the ground. Each year now we are preparing the next summer, especially for dealing with water issues, and we have a permanent group with the safety authority and the environmental authority of the Ministry of Environment in order to discuss what we will do during the summer in order to balance the system if we have a problem. So this is something which is anticipated every year with the authorities. We have contributed to the National Adaptation Strategy of France because we were involved since many years on this issue, so we have been contributing in the stakeholder consultation. And one of the things we have raised as a big question is, on one side, the utilities can adapt to climate change, and many utilities now have taken this issue very seriously. But we have also to look at what will become the regulation. If the regulation today is very often written for biodiversity reasons or for environmental reasons, but if the climate is changing, the reasons for what you have written, the regulation, could change also. And so the regulation will have to be resilient as well. So this is some concepts that have been discussed and accepted into our French debates. And develop the knowledge, which is quite important topics, and that which is dealing in our research and development division today, and we are keeping a lot of contact with them. So I think I will skip all these slides, which are giving examples, and some of the examples will be also dealt in other presentations today. So I'm just going to the conclusions. So what are the lessons? So the new challenge which are ahead of us imply the use of more and more sophisticated meteorological and climate products. So the way we have worked in the past for different reasons, and especially because we have been advised correctly, maybe at the right time, has been a good way, a very efficient way to act. But the lesson is that you need to have a continuation of a research and development effort. This is something quite important. For the new challenges related to climate change, we have been able to build some kind of proxy of small climate services for our business entities, but we think that this new activity has also to find its own organization within the society. This is really a new challenge now for the future. So tomorrow there will be key issues, the management of renewable energy. We have talked on this issue before, and how we can take benefit from seasonal, decadal forecast and probability forecast, which are the most sophisticated products you can find today. So public-private collaboration in the adaptation business, this is something key for anticipating, to have a clear organization, to be operational, and really to work more on this concept of resistance and resilience, which will be quite key in the way the society will be able to adapt and to react to new climate change events. I would like to thank you for your attention.
Okay, we've got plenty of time for questions. If anyone has any questions, would you mind?
That one?
Well,
I'll use this one. You mentioned that the heat wave in August of 2003 cost EDF on the order of, I think you said 300 million euros. Yeah. It's a remarkably big number even for EDF. Can you elaborate at all on what that comprised, what gave rise to those costs?
Yeah, basically this was the, we had to buy electricity on the spot market at this time. And during some days, the price of electricity on the wholesale market price was pretty high. So if you this cost is a comparison with the standard situation where we have our hedging and we have our buying spot price, spot electricity market. But the main cost was coming from this. We had to shut down for a very short time some power plants, but basically it was not. We had some losses of power generation for sure, not a lot, but the costs were mixing the power generation we couldn't make and the spot electricity we had to buy at the wholesale market price. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I've got him. You were talking about one of the key issues that there should be also a lot of clarity between your organization with other industrials about your preparations, for instance, for next summer. Is that information also free available, or is it still kept between you and your partners? Is it, for instance, available on the internet, on your websites, or whatever?
I'm not sure that the information. I'm sure that the public authorities are giving information about this issue I don't know if it is on their site or in reports, but this is something which is transparent with the safety authority and the Ministry of Ecology, there is a direction of water, and so the okay, I don't remember if the information is put on the site, but there is an official communiqué on the state of the water before each summer. So I can check that if you want, but I'm sure that there's some information which is made publicly available.
Yeah, just clarification. Yeah, I don't think the EDF Outlook is available, but the RTE one, so the TSO's summer outlook and winter outlook are publicly available on our website. You can find them very easily.
Yeah.
Well, I was actually perhaps going to ask a somewhat related question in a sense. So, I mean, EDF is clearly a very sophisticated user of climate and weather information, but not everyone else is. So to what extent do you see the resilience of EDF and your business being affected by the resilience and information that is ingested by others in terms of the climate information?
You mean ingested by others? What do you mean by this?
So EDF can, EDF is very up to date on the latest climate projections,
Yeah,
on the forecasting,
Yeah.
but others aren't. So if their business is interrupted or disrupted by an extreme event, to what extent is EDF vulnerable second-hand to their inability to understand the climate?
This is not easy to respond to such a question, because it depends on what kind of business you are talking about. This is for the investment resilience, or if it is for the power market. So the power market is quite connected now in Europe, especially. So I think that there are more and more utilities which are affected by the same problems that we have, especially the temperature regulation we have in France, for instance. You have such a temperature regulation in every country in Europe, because basically the reason for what you have this regulation has to come from reasons that are decided at EU level. So it's difficult to measure the extent to which each utility is taking into account climate information. So this is something which is not easy to answer. But from my experience, I'm seeing more and more utility taking into account in one way or the other some kind of climate information in order to do their business. So to which extent, it's very difficult to respond.
Okay, we have time for one more quick question if anyone has any. Okay, if not, then we'll move on to the next speaker. And thank you again to Jean-Yves.